So welcome everyone. This is the October Fair District's all volunteer huddle. We love to get together with everyone once a month and just go through what's happening with redistricting in Ohio. We have our agenda here. We're going to share the joyful kind of summary of what happened on Fair Maps Day on September 17th. We're going to update you on what's happening with Ohio's congressional redistricting process. Where are we? What can we expect next? We're going to talk to you about some upcoming events that are in a few places around Ohio, and some other things we have planned, as well as give you a short update about redistricting nationally. And so, we can just get started. But again, I will just reiterate, please feel free to put comments in the chat. But if you have questions, pop them into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to them. We will send a follow-up tomorrow. We're going to send a follow-up with both link to the slides and a recording and all the links that we have this evening. And Elizabeth has popped into the chat a big document that has all the links that are for this whole, all the things we're talking about tonight. So I wanted to first start out with kind of the good news. The good news is it's so great to be together with everybody here. And we had a wonderful Fair Maps Day on September 17th, which was Constitution Day. And we started out in the church across the street from the State House. There were definitely 500 of us, which is super exciting. The church was absolutely packed to the rafters. And, then when everybody got up to leave, that center photograph is a picture of everyone crushing to get out the door and head to the State House. That was really a pretty fun thing to be there in the church together with everyone. And then, and on that slide, there is a link to a 5-minute summary video. So if you happen to not have been there, I definitely recommend that you take a look at that video because it's pretty fun. It has kind of all the different parts of our event. And then on the next slide, once we left the church, we slowly but surely moved across the street and started to walk around the State House. And people had wonderful signs. There were people there from all across Ohio. We had our union brothers and sisters there. We had our coalition partners from ACLU and Common Cause and League and all different kinds of groups. And that was super fun. And then we actually, you can go on to the next slide, we actually had enough people that we managed to make a full circle around the entire State House. And we did a cool thing where we first held hands or signs and we faced the State House and we did some chants like do your job, follow the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we kind of did the wave and we turned around and we faced the outside and we addressed the people of Ohio and we had some chants. And then we all gathered on the west side of the State House, and that picture below is how awesome we looked when we were all together. And we had a press conference and we heard from some speakers. We had some wonderful speakers. And then we went home. And so that was it was an impressive event. It was an, upbeat event, and it felt both joyful and powerful. We did get a lot of good press. And it was, unequivocally a successful event. So thank you so much if you were able to join us, and definitely take a look at the video if you weren't. And actually, we can also add some links to photo albums as well. Okay, so now for kind of the bad news, or the next part of the news, which is, we are powerful and we are determined, but these folks are bound and determined to draw us some bad maps. Like, we are not deluding ourselves. We know that these people are going to draw us some bad maps. We have a bad map right now. We have a 10-5 map, and we ought to have an 8-7 map. And when I say we ought to, I mean if the map reflected how Ohioans vote in statewide elections, then it would be an 8-7 map. That's not a personal preference. That's how Ohioans vote. And so we're already, voters are already being cheated of that fair representation as the map is now. And yet, we know that they are going to try their hardest to give us an even worse map. And the map that you see on the bottom, that's the current congressional map, is the 10-5 map. The map that you see on the right-hand side on the bottom, that's a 13-2 map, which is, we have a link in the links document to that map. You can take a look at it. And that's kind of, what we're afraid of. So are we like Sisyphus? Are we all just, pushing that rock up that hill? Well, yes, we are. So when we get together and we have these meetings, we want to have an effect. We want to mitigate the worst possible outcomes. And we believe that we will be able to have some ability to mitigate the worst possible outcome. But is it likely that they will abide by the Constitution? Is it likely that they will have a religious conversion? Is it likely that they will suddenly abide, by the rules and give us a fair map? We know that it isn't likely, and yet we are still here. And I thought it was important that we kind of are square with you guys about why we're here. And we're here because we need to take a stand, win or lose, to make sure that they know that we know that they're doing wrong. Um, we have to remind them to live up to the rules. We have to remind them what those rules are. We have to take a stand and defend democracy. We have to make sure that the Ohio public, the American public, know that what they're doing is wrong. And, silence equals acquiescence. And it is not appropriate for us to be silent while they rig maps. So, this is why we're still doing this. And I thought it was important just to kind of get that out there and be clear about that. And of course, we'll do all the things that we can do. I can see in the chat that, there's a question about suing. Yes, let's use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat. It's easier there. The problem is the makeup of our Ohio Supreme Court, which is where the case would go, makes it, tricky to think that we would succeed there. But certainly we will do everything that we possibly can do. But we're asking you, Ohio is so lucky that we have the redistricting advocates that we do. Y'all are knowledgeable, you care, you're determined, you're unstoppable. And I'm just encouraging people to keep going, even though we know on a certain level that we are kind of banging our heads against the wall, but we're doing it for a reason, and it's meaningful, and we appreciate people, tuning in and paying attention and calling them out. So yeah, I think that's that. And we can go on to kind of where we're at in the process. I think that's Elizabeth.
Oh, the process. So the process is a bit convoluted. So just to say where we are right now, long, strange trip that it has been. The current congressional maps, the reason that we are doing this right now is that the maps that we voted on in 2022 and 2024 need to be replaced because they were passed, quotation marks, scare quotes, without bipartisan support in 2021. And the constitutional amendment that Ohioans voted for in 2018 says that if lawmakers pass a map without bipartisan support, that it has to be redrawn midway through the cycle. And that's where we are right now. So you can go to the next slide, please. So here is the congressional redistricting timeline. So we are about a third of the way through. The first deadline was for last week, September 30th, was the deadline for the state legislature to pass a map with a supermajority in both chambers, plus 50% support from both Democrats and Republicans. I know you are very surprised to hear that that did not happen. We are now in phase two. And so, because the lawmakers failed to pass a bipartisan map in the legislature, the authority now goes to the Ohio Redistricting Commission. They have to pass a map by Halloween. If the Ohio Redistricting Commission does not pass a map by October 31st, then the authority goes back to the Ohio legislature. The Ohio legislature then has until November 30th to pass a map. At this point, they only have to have a simple majority. The rules do change. They do have to follow more strict guidelines. And so they do not have to have that supermajority. They don't have to have that bipartisan support, but they do now officially have to not have a map that favors one party over the other, and they have to justify their decisions. And we can go to the next slide, please. So where we just were was, and many of you were in this room too, we had hearings at the State House. The Joint Committee on Congressional Redistricting held two public hearings, the first on September 30th, or sorry, on September 22nd, and the second on September 30th, which was the actual deadline. The purpose of these hearings, ostensibly, is for citizens to be able to come and give testimony on how a map would impact them. Of course, the difficulty here was that there was no map to weigh in on. We'll get to that a bit more in a moment. These pictures are lovely. Well, some of them are lovely. I love to see our veterans here, Andrea and Mindy and Linda, and of course Mia. There's a picture of Senator Timken here, and I don't know, for those of you who are watching the hearings, it was a moment of some hilarity when she says with great earnestness, the word fairness does not appear in the Ohio Constitution. Um, and everybody just kind of like laughed and what? And she doubled down and said it again. So these two hearings, yeah, they without a map to riff on, they followed the technical law, the spirit of the law, not so much. So now the process, the map making, goes to the Ohio Redistricting Commission, which consists of the governor, the auditor of the state, the secretary of state, and two legislative appointees from each chamber. So one Democrat from the House, one Republican from the House, one Democrat from the Senate, one Republican from the Senate. And they have to pass a map with bipartisan support. In this case, that means two Democrats have to support a map. There are only two Democrats on the commission. It is possible that that happens. That is what happened with State House maps. The climate is different now than it was in 2023. It's possible because the Democrats may feel that this is the best shot for getting a map that they believe to be in their favor. The speculation is that it's less likely this time because the climate is somehow even more partisan than it was 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, there was also the promise of a redistricting commission that was an independent redistricting commission that we all really hoped was coming, and that whatever happened in the redistricting, the Ohio Redistricting Commission at that point would sort of be made moot by the independent redistricting commission that was coming. We all know that that was not to be. So the stakes are different and higher, we believe, at this point. So conventional wisdom is that it is unlikely for there to be a bipartisan map that is agreed upon during this phase two of the process. And of course, this phase two of the process also depends on an actual map being produced upon which to deal upon. So again, what we are sort of hearing is that there is no intention for a map to be produced. We don't know that. Of course, we are not witches, reports to the contrary. So we don't know, but we'll see what happens. So the deadline for the Ohio Redistricting Commission is on Halloween, and then it will again go back into the Ohio General Assembly. And we'll go back to the next slide.
The slides are, there we go.
So a common refrain that you have heard and will be hearing, I suspect, for the next few weeks is, where's the map? So we're going to be saying that a lot. You've heard us say it a lot. And it's a great question, right? How are citizens supposed to weigh in on this congressional map that will greatly impact the resources that we receive and the representation that we get? Yes, Claire, that's correct. When there's no map for us to respond to. So in the last few weeks, probably 100 or so maps have been submitted by citizens. Most have been pretty reasonable looking. Some have been pretty absurd. But the point is that people took time to create a map. Just regular folks have taken time out of their complicated and busy lives. However, the people who are elected to do so couldn't be bothered. So I think that's really important that we talk about the fact that these people who swore an oath to the Constitution really just couldn't find it in their day to make a map. So there is an action here that is linked in the many links that we are sharing with you, and I'm putting it in the chat again here. There's an action to call the committee members of the majority party, and particularly Senator Timken and Representative Stewart, who seem to be the most active on this committee, to say, hey, y'all, where's that map? We also recommend calling the folks on the redistricting commission that is to be seated shortly. So the governor, the auditor, and the secretary of state. And again, you don't have to be real deep and thorough in your questioning. Just literally say, where's that map? And that's it. So we can go to the next slide. So the redistricting commission, so as we said, the standard ones are always going to be the governor, the auditor, and the secretary of state. So we know who those folks are. It was just announced that the legislative representative, so it's the sorry, words are hard. The Senate Minority Leader, Nikki Antonio, who was on the commission before, and House Minority Leader Danny Isaacson, who is new on the Democrat side, and then on the Republican side, Senator Jane Timken, forever famous to us for is fairness in the Constitution, and Representative Brian Stewart, who I think holds a special place in all of our hearts for the role that he played in the 2023 election, one person, one vote. And when I say heart, maybe that's not quite the anatomy that I want, but I think you guys can use your imagination there. Senate President McCauley says he expects to have a hearing next week. Exciting. We'll see. He also said that Republicans don't have a map to put out yet, and that's been sort of the talking point that we've heard recently from several folks in the majority party. Um, Speaker Huffman, there was an article again linked in there that said he was quoted as saying, I think introducing a map accomplishes anything. He also said, people come up to me all the time in the grocery store and, they tell me their opinion. And I hope that he does not mistake that for um, a hearing and that really is not the same thing. He's not really doing his job if he's, in the produce aisle hearing about splits. So, um, I think that's it. The Ohio House has created their version of the House Redistricting Committee. The last I heard, there were only Republicans on the committee. So, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means that Democrats have not yet chosen their folks yet. So it is not does not mean that there will only be Republicans on the committee. Although when we first saw it, we were like, well, that's confusing. But we will hear, I'm sure, any day now, who the Democrats are going to be on the committee, and that's where we are right now.
So yeah, so they've got this process. We have this process, and they're kind of preparing to ignore the second step is what it feels like. Huffman saying, who really cares, and starting to work back in the General Assembly at the same time as we haven't yet started on the second step, which is the Ohio Redistricting Commission. So Fair Districts is kind of has a response to that. And we know that a true mapping process that followed the Constitution would have maps that are proposed. It would have public hearings in around the state, and the public hearings would request feedback about the maps that have been proposed and suggested amendments to those maps in order to make a better map. And so we are trying to our feeling is they should do their job. They should uphold their oath of office. They should show us the maps. And so we're trying to kind of model that all these things are possible. It's possible to have a map. It's possible to make a map better. It's possible to go out around the state and talk to people where they are. It's possible to get suggestions and make maps better based on those suggestions. And so we're starting with these three events in Bowling Green, Dayton, and Kent on October 23rd, 28th, and 30th. And we're calling these What's Mappin', a community conversation with fair districts. And the idea is to be kind of a cross between a model commission and a town hall where we get to talk about the process and answer your questions and talk about some of the traps that the bad mappers are setting for people when they give testimony, and then look at the current congressional map, talk about what's wrong with it, and solicit ideas on what could make it better, and work towards creating a better map, that we could submit. So we are going to be in these towns on these dates at these times in these places, and we hope that you will join us there. And if you sign up, we are going to send you some kind of prep materials with, how to look at the map and how to kind of submit some suggestions. So we hope this will be a useful and interesting and, worthwhile process, while at the same time worthwhile in and of itself, but also useful to call out the, inadequate and wrong behavior of the folks that should be following the Constitution and aren't. So that's about that. The other thing we're doing on the next slide, and I had to pop up and go to the door because I just had something delivered which was relevant to our next thing. We are beginning a Good Trouble Brigade where we are asking folks to come and hang out at the State House. We are printing up the Where's the Map shirts, and we have these lovely Where's the Map buttons that just got delivered to me. And we're going to have rally signs as well. And we're just going to hang around the State House and ask people, hey, where's the map? We want to see the map. So if you are interested in joining our Good Trouble Brigade and going to hearings, testifying, just hanging around the State House over the next few weeks, sign up on the sign up form. It's in the document that Elizabeth keeps dropping in that has all the links on it. Um, and we will be in touch with kind of next steps and, tell us your t-shirt size and all of that. And we will get you set up. Um, Next slide, I think, is for Catherine. And um,
So there
I,
were a couple
oh,
questions.
okay, great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say there were a couple questions in there that I thought it was worth talking about. There was an early question just about, well, how do you push back? Like what are the rules that are in the Ohio Constitution and how do you push back? So one of the things that they have been using is essentially the same kind of thing that they used during the ballot board committee, which was, hey, well, look it up in the dictionary. It's the manipulation of district lines to advantage one party over the other. Well, this is a really decent definition, right? I mean, it's a decent definition. The problem is, they seem to suggest that any redistricting, which you're moving the district lines, is gerrymandering. And so I think it's very important to know there is actually a metric in the Ohio Constitution. It was used, it's for state legislative maps, but it was used by the Ohio Supreme Court to assess the congressional maps as being unconstitutional. And that criteria is you look at 10 years of voting on statewide elections. So president and senator and governor, auditor, secretary of state, treasurer, all of those kind of statewide races. And you come up with a metric. So, all right, what percentage voted for Democrats? What percentage voted for Republicans? Well, if you take that metric, it's 45% voted for Democrats, 55% voted for Republicans. And so it is disingenuous to act like any map making, anytime you redraw the district lines, that somehow you are gerrymandering. And you can always refer people back to the Ohio Constitution for a decent metric for evaluating gerrymandering. Or what we called it when in 2014 when we were advocating for this. This was Dick Gunther's idea. Professor Dick Gunther, he's a professor of political sciences. He's emeritus at this point. We called it representational fairness. And a metric is really useful. Mia, did you want to add to that?
I did. I just wanted to say that when we're looking at the map, we're looking at the whole map, all 15 districts, and we want those 15 districts to represent roughly how people vote in Ohio in statewide elections. But in order to achieve that, and in order to draw any
Mhm.
map, you have to make decisions about where you draw the lines. If you make a decision about where to draw the line, in order to make sure that you have districts that balance out or that are fair in the end, that doesn't mean you're gerrymandering. If you end up with a fair map at the end, that's the very definition of the opposite of gerrymandering. You're making a fair map. But what they say is if you make any decision at all to draw a line, then suddenly you're gerrymandering, which of course, their maps are gerrymandered. Catherine, I am going to say goodbye because I have to run. And
Are you
and
saying you just got the last word in? Is that
I
what you're
did. I
saying?
got the last word in, and then I'm going to run away. Um, if
All right,
that
we'll
is
we'll
all
see
right.
we'll see you later.
Okay, thank you so
So
much.
this is the other thing as we're thinking about kind of this effort, which it's an incredibly challenging effort to get people's attention. I really appreciated the suggestion from Ren saying, "Hey, have we reached out to our Republican friends?" And I think that's incredibly important. If you are left of center, reach out to some of your Republican friends because nearly 75% of voters approve the rules that are currently in the Ohio Constitution. So in May of 2018, voters of all stripes approved the rules that they're now operating under. And so, if reach out to friends that you might think, oh, they're not going to be into this, they will be into this because everyone wants to participate in meaningful elections. Everyone wants to have their vote count. We all want to be able to hold these folks accountable. And so I think it's just incredibly important to remember that ending gerrymandering, ensuring map making that is fair, and in this case, keeps communities together, doesn't unduly favor one political party over the other, there is a genuine benefit for every single voter in the state of Ohio. And on that note, anything else that you wanted to add, Elizabeth, or something that I might not have seen on the questions? Oh, you're still on mute.
It's like I've never done this before. Lawson asked whether we were going to propose a feasible model map, which is a great
So
question.
one of the things that's interesting is that we had kind of talked about doing that, right? So during the last time that we were doing congressional map making, I was actually the one that went and testified about the competition maps, and explained them and went through them thoroughly. And so I kind of was like, well, we could choose to submit them again, um, but at the end of the day, we need to see their maps. There are some decent maps to consider, and one of the things we're going to be showing you is a way so you can look at all the different maps. So on Dave's redistricting app that have been submitted, there's some maps that aren't great, but there are some maps that are really interesting, including the one that Deidre Reese submitted for the Equal Districts Coalition. The Democrats' maps are well worth doing a dive into too. So we may still actually, submit a map, but at the moment, we just want them to show their maps. They have plenty of citizen maps. It's now time for the map makers to show us their maps. Oh, and this other thing, so I did get a question, kind of a little side private thing, where somebody said that they were feeling a little shy about calling about where are the maps. And I recommended that they actually do voicemail. So like if you're a little bit shy or you want to practice, make the phone call out of business hours, leave a voicemail, and then you might get your vim vigor and be ready to actually make the call and talk to an aide. Also, the aides are there waiting for your phone call. They want to hear, all the reason they have all these aides is to hear what it is that we think. And they're supposed to be gathering the information so they understand what constituents want. And boy, do we want those maps. Now, here we are at the referendum. Okay, so we get through the map making process. The voting districts are genuinely horrible. We can actually referendum the maps if they actually submit them during the time that it comes from the legislature. So if it's passed as a bill, we can actually do a referendum. There was a question about well, how does this actually work? And do you actually have the full 90 days? No, you do not have the full 90 days from the time the governor signs it. And the reason you don't have the full 90 days is you actually need to go through a process where you get approved, your petition gets approved by the Attorney General. So it's one of the reasons why referendums are so challenging, because it can take a while to actually get that approval from the Attorney General. Also, I think it's worth remembering as we're thinking about signature collection to referendum a map. Let's say they pass it the day before Thanksgiving, right? Let's just say, I think that seems logical, right? Like they get it done before they go off for Thanksgiving. Um, we're collecting in December, January, February. Like, just imagine how incredibly cold it will be. And it will take a lot of effort. Not saying it's not doable, but it's important to remember as we're going into this, kind of the challenges that are there. The other challenge that's worth knowing about is that in 2012, there was this really bad voting bill. This was House Bill 194 of that time period. And folks like me, folks that are on this call, we collected signatures so that we could actually referendum it. And as opposed to there being, this referendum question on the November ballot in 2012, which was a presidential year, the state legislature quickly repealed all the language. And so it may be that this is another tool that they could use where they repeal and replace and repeal and replace. And so that could be, the thing that the thing that's so challenging about all of these fair districts efforts are the folks that we elect, the folks that are government officials, are willing to play games. And so I wanted to be sure as we were thinking and talking about referendums that we were very clear about, what we're up against. Elizabeth, any questions there? Because I am focusing on the slide.
Well, a couple. So, and this requires us to get into the heads of people we don't understand, but I'm going to read this one from SM. So, two questions. What is their strategy of not proposing a map? How do they want this process to roll out and why? And then second, as you mentioned, the leadership party is not interested in fairness. I'm glad to hear about the formation of a good trouble group. Continuing to target the leadership party to ask them to be fair hasn't and isn't going to move the needle. Are there any good trouble strategies that could put them in a position where they're required to change their positions?
Okay, I think one of the things that we can't necessarily do easily is get into their heads. But what we can do is look at past behavior. So, for example, if, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, one of the things that we know that they have done in the past is they've dragged their feet until the very last moment. So there's not time for public comment. There's not time for that. And that has been, that's been very effective for them. Yes, the Ohio Supreme Court send them back to the drawing board over and over again, but that's what they do. And I think we can remember lots of times where it's like the final day and they finally have a map. Or you remember we had the two map makers, the Democrat and Republican map makers, and we were able to watch them as they, on the Ohio Channel as they were crafting districts, and how at the end of the day, they had some challenges, but it was coming together. But just at the last minute, the Republican members of the commission were like, "Oh, we can't do this. The Democrat and Republican map makers can't get this together in time. So here we are to rescue you," well before the actual deadline, which was at midnight. And so I think the thing that makes this frustrating is that even though we have really good rules in the Ohio Constitution, we need to do what we can to put pressure. And so when we think about the Where's the Map campaign, and one of the things we focused on, so this was a brainchild of Kathy Johnston, who's an amazing organizer. She's retired at this point. She was like, we could greet them with signs, as they were trying to enter the building. And I was like, well, signs they will take away, and things are a little more challenging at the State House, but they won't take away your shirt. And so, one of the things that I think will be really powerful is just what I think of as a program of pestering them. So wherever they go, somebody is literally asking them, "Where's the map?" And so it's just an ongoing drip, 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 right? And how successful this will be is how much pressure we can actually put. And I do think, when Mia was talking about, well, are we Sisyphus, right? Are we Sisyphus? It's well worth remembering that our goal here is to mitigate the harm. And drawing lots and lots of public attention to this gets lots and lots of people asking what's going on, wondering why after 2024, when they said that what was in the Ohio Constitution was perfectly fine and that the citizens, not politicians proposal was in fact, gerrymandering, it gets it back to, wait a second, you told the public that what's in the Ohio Constitution is adequate. So I'm hoping that Ohioans of all stripes will really push back. Any other questions?
Well, and I just want to say too, and I know so many of you have been doing this for so long. I think, whether you meant to, build this in or not, if you are a redistricting reformer, you have to think of the long game because this is a long game, and you have to, um, you know, you have to feel it in your bones that this is not something that changes overnight, and government reform, particularly around this kind of content, it's such wonky material, right? That it takes a long time, I think, to just penetrate public understanding. Um, the I'm always trying to look for a silver lining. So Catherine's going to talk about the national scene in a minute. I think as sort of grim as a lot of it is, I think the one kind of silver lining about the national conversation that sort of unexpectedly exploded in the last few months about redistricting is that a lot more people understand what it's about. And that's true times 1,000 in Ohio because we've been talking about it for so long here. And so you might say, oh, well, if we've been talking about it so long, why don't we have all the shiny, beautiful things that we should have? And that's a fine question. But we get a little closer. We get a little closer. So it's, two steps forward, one step back. And so it's again, it's a long game. So much of the win that we will have is through public education. And so, yes, part of the strategy is to make these ghouls really uncomfortable and be mosquitoes who peck at them and make it uncomfortable for them to walk through their day. That is satisfying, and that absolutely is part of it. But the other part of it is to do things that grow public understanding and public knowledge. So, like, yes, absolutely, it is very fun to annoy people who do us wrong. But part of that is that doing things like that brings media attention, brings stories, and somebody else is going to read it, and somebody who's not going to be at the State House on the day that you're wearing a Where's the Map t-shirt is going to read an article and be like, what are these crazy people doing at the State House? I want to learn more about this. What is this redistrict business? I keep hearing all about it. And that's another person that you're going to get on your side, right? So it's a long game, and part of this is that public education. So a lot of this is truly the planting of seeds. We're building more and more people who understand, because when you are able to explain this to people, what is gerrymandering? Why are people fighting in this? Why are these people, so many of you, why have you been doing this for so long? Why are you so passionate about it? Because it's about basic fairness, whether it's in the Constitution or not, Senator. This is about basic fairness. And when you explain it to people like that, it really resonates. This is fundamental American stuff, right? And so regardless of party orientation, regardless of who you vote for, we all deserve to have the representation that reflects where we are. And that is as basic as it gets. And when you are able to talk about it like that with people, the more you can do that, the more people understand and the more people you get on your side. So step off soapbox. You are muted. The man is trying to shut you up, Catherine.
Isn't that funny? It's never kind of ending. You would think, 5 years past the beginning of the COVID epidemic, I'd do a little better. Anyway, so this section is really about what's happening in other locations. And I think that's incredibly, like as we're thinking about the challenges we're having, it's worth thinking about it in some national context. So I initially broke this down by state, but then I was like, it's useful to know like when things happened as well. So it's broken down by times. And then the materials we'll send you has all sorts of kind of good information, all sorts of links. If you look at the links doc that Elizabeth has been sharing, there's just a ton of information there. So I'm going to start with this. August 21st, and I bet you all knew this, that the California governor actually signed basically a proposed state constitutional amendment to temporarily, you know, until the next census, take the map making away from the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. He then signed a bill redrawing the maps. And then 40, the thing to know about this is that it'll be on this November's ballot. It's Prop 50. And then if you can imagine, 46 of the 52 districts I have got D +5, so the Democratic leaning +5, so they're like 55% Democratic leaning districts. So one of the things that is interesting is, we spend a lot of time on independent citizens redistricting commissions, and the people of California are having an opportunity to say, okay, in this particular case, I'm willing to be gerrymandered, or the opposite, where they say, no, we need to go with the map that we have. So on the 25th of August, the Utah State Court struck down Utah's congressional districts. Now, this is somewhat similar to the kinds of challenges that we've had. In 2018, the Utah voters passed a citizen initiative designed to fight gerrymandering by creating a redistricting commission that would provide maps to the state legislature to either do the thumbs up or thumbs down. In other words, the state legislature would have the final say, but this commission would essentially would be the creators of maps. Either way, they get a thumbs up or thumbs down. What happened is that 2 years later, the state legislature essentially passed legislation saying, oh, the redistricting commission is fully advisory. They have no role in giving us maps or anything other than making suggestions. Well, as you might imagine, their map was found to be unconstitutional because the state legislature overrode that citizen initiative. So then we get to August 29th, and Texas Governor Abbott signed the state legislature's new map. Now, the Tribune, this is the Texas Tribune, found that the new district lines, they end up keeping all 25 seats held by Republicans safe, meaning that they believe that there's enough of a margin, at least 5 points, 5 points towards Republicans or the GOP, those districts. And it actually created 5 additional districts that favor Republicans. Now, those districts, of course, are being challenged in federal court. Then on September 28th, we get to Missouri, and then they did a mid-decade redraw. Basically, Missouri has 8 congressional districts with 6 being held by Republicans. This adds 1 more Republican-leaning districts. Now, the thing that's important here is opponents are challenging in court, and they have begun a referendum petition. Then we get to October 6th, so just a little while ago, and the Utah State Legislature redrew their district lines. Now, one of the things that's crazy here is all 4 of the districts still favor Republicans. Now, they claim, hey, Democrats are not going to be at such a disadvantage. They would only be at a 6-point disadvantage on the Eastern District that's in Salt Lake, and 11-point disadvantage in the Western District. And so we're just having challenges all over the country. In Indiana, our neighbors in Indiana have been eyeing adding some more Republican districts. It's not clear that that will be effective. At this point, there's talk of J.D. Vance coming to visit them again to add some additional pressure. And I think the thing that's really hard, we are the only state that is required by our Ohio Constitution to redraw district lines this year. And certainly Utah had to because they were found to be unconstitutional. But gerrymandering is in the air and catching. And, I highly encourage you to kind of follow what's happening all across the country. Elizabeth, any questions or anything that folks wondered about?
I think we're in good shape.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to take us to Louisiana and to SCOTUS. So, following the 2020 census, the state legislature created two majority minority districts. This is 2 out of 6. Previously, they only had one majority minority district. So, non-black white voters sued, arguing the map was an unconstitutional gerrymander because race was predominantly used. So even though essentially the districts roughly are proportionate to the state's black population, there was an argument that race was a predominant factor. Three-judge panel heard this argument and agreed to block the map, but May of last year, the U.S. Supreme Court essentially said, we're blocking this order and we're allowing them to use the congressional maps for 2024. In June, end of June, SCOTUS ordered the case to be re-argued. Now, as you might imagine, this is complicated, and it becomes more complicated because the Louisiana Attorney General effectively has switched sides and is joining the white voters in their argument. Now, you might say to yourself, well, what the heck is going on? We've had minority majority districts for years. Ohio has a minority majority district, Congressional District 11. What is going on? Now, you remember there have been a variety of attacks on the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The argument that they have is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, through the creation of minority majority districts, actually violates the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. And so that will be heard on October 15th. And it's something that's well worth paying attention to and could impact, not broadly Ohio, but certainly Southern map making, for years to come, if the use of the Voting Rights Act to ensure minority majority districts and to ensure that there isn't racial gerrymandering, if that comes to an end, it will be very challenging when it comes to the map making in those southern states. So we have redistricting in the news.
Tom just asked a great question and also shared a sentiment that I frequently experience, which my eyes are starting to glaze over. Would this create more state districts across the nation? Heard with the eyes glazing over. Sometimes
Poor
mine.
Tom, I'm sorry. So I think
He
the
doesn't
thing
mean that
that's
with
really
boring. I
hard,
think it's just that it's just so much, right?
it's so much. So what this could do is it could create, in the case of California, they were gerrymandering for the Democrats. The rest of the states that I talked about are gerrymandering to create more Republican safe seats or districts that favor Republicans. So it's not clear, for example, that the addition of the California gerrymandering, even if it passes in November, is going to be enough to overcome the Republican gerrymanders. And I totally get your eyes glazing over and feeling like, oh my goodness, where is this going? But one of the things that we do know is these are the kinds of shenanigans that are happening across the country. And what this does mean is there are lots and lots of people that pay tons of attention only to the national news, which means there are more people right now thinking about gerrymandering and thinking about what it means to create voting districts and how the manipulation of our votes impacts who we send, our delegation to DC, the folks that we send to represent us may not listen to us at all because we don't have the kind of needed accountability because of gerrymandering. If you're in a safe seat, what ends up is, the districts, you end up with those primary races being the most important. It's super easy only to pay attention to your party, and um, it's a real challenge that we have as a country right now. Elizabeth, anything else you want to add or any other questions?
I mean, I have to say, and this is coming from me as an opinion holder, as an individual, not representing any organizations, it's pretty depressing, honestly, to watch this national race to the bottom. The one thing I will say, and this is me speaking from a nonpartisan organizational point of view, is one thing that I run into every day when I'm talking about gerrymandering is there's always somebody who's like, well, if it was the other party gerrymandering, you'd be, you wouldn't have anything to say. And I'm like, actually, as the League of Women Voters, we've been fighting gerrymandering for, 50 years, and we've been doing it when the Democrats are in charge, we've been doing it when the Republicans are in charge. And this is another example of like, yeah, when gerrymandering is happening, it's about power. It's raw power. It's not about partisan ideals, and like it's really about power. And it's bad no matter who does it. And there are, you can talk about means to ends, you can talk about greater good, and I could make arguments about it. But it's interesting here in Ohio, um, we can say, like, no, actually, and this is again my personal opinion, what's happening in California is not good. It's dragging us all down. And from an Ohio point of view, it's taking resources away from other anti-gerrymandering efforts. Again, opinion, mine, not anybody else's. That, could have been differently spent, and it triggered further partisan gerrymandering that is like a domino effect on other states. And I don't know what's right and wrong, you know, but it is, again, it's about power. It's not about party, and it's sure not about the people. It's about other people's power. It's not about ours. So,
Well, we are getting close to 7, and we don't want to keep you past the hour. We will send you a follow-up, but it's, hard to follow everything, but we wanted to be sure, there's going to be information for you on the Fair Districts website. I highly encourage you enjoying Dave's redistricting app and spending a little time looking at things. The bit.ly, all the congressional maps, is to a spreadsheet that the Ohio politics guru, Andrew Green, created. If you go to column Q, you can find all of the maps on Dave's redistricting app. So if you're like, not everybody's going to want to do this, but if you are one of those mapping folks, I highly encourage you to check it out. And then, there's the redistricting legislature.ohio, .ohio.gov. For that is the state legislature tackling redistricting, and redistrictingohio.gov is for the folks at the Ohio Redistricting Commission. And I think the thing that's hard right now is there are two different tracks, and it's hard to know exactly what's happening. But no matter what, this is likely to end at the end of November.
I wanted to say two things. One, please share your ways to be annoying with us. We are always looking for more ways to step up our irritating game. Please share them. And then, yeah, I just put the link to what Catherine's about to talk about in the chat. So.
Well, and I just wanted to invite you all to this October 15 webinar. This is, red, red wine and blue, and League and Common Cause, and I think this will be fun. In many cases, this is going to work through us thinking through all of the things. Like if you listen to today and you're like, I have so many questions, this is the webinar for you. And please join us. And then
Gonna
I
be-
just wanted to remind everybody that our next huddle is November 12th at 6 p.m. But we would love to hear from you before that. So if you do have ideas, if you have suggestions, please let us know. And with that, are you ready to say goodbye, Elizabeth?
I think we can say goodnight.
All right. A big thank you. So many of you joined us. I was so happy to see that more than 100 people were on this webinar. Did you know that? So a big thank you to you all. Let's keep up the fight. We all deserve to participate in meaningful elections. And with that, I'm going to bid you all adieu.
Good night,
Be
everybody.
well.
Much. See you in the time of annoyance.
I
Night.
love it.